The readings from John 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. That life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true life that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who comes from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.'" Out of his fullness we have all received grace in the place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who himself, God, and is the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known.
The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You may have noticed that John, as he begins his telling of the life of Jesus, misses out what probably seemed to us like some fairly important parts of the Christmas story. There are no shepherds, no angels, no stars, no wise men, no Mary and Joseph, certainly no crib for a bed. And what's more, he doesn't even mention Jesus by name until his 36 verses into his gospel. What's going on? What makes John's telling of the story so different? Well, the difference is between poetry and prose. William Wordsworth said that poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. The ancient Greek philosopher Plutarch said, "Painting is silent poetry, and poetry is painting that speaks." Well, John's painting is abstraction. He isn't interested so much in the visible details as in getting at the essence of the subject itself. John wants to tell us what the birth of Jesus means. And like poetry, his words describing the significance of Jesus' birth speak to us on many different levels. It's been wonderfully said of John's gospel, the way that he tells his story, that it's shallow enough that a child can paddle in it, and deep enough for an elephant to swim in. We can take it at different levels. And perhaps one of the reasons I think that we love the carols that we sing so much at this time of year is because we know that poetry can often reach places that mere prose can't. There's something here for all of us. In the beginning, John says. And it's no accident that the first words John speaks about Jesus seek to draw us all the way back to the start of the Bible, the beginning of the book of Genesis, which we heard right at the start of tonight's carol service. It's as if John is saying from the outset that God is recreating the world in and through Jesus. That's how significant the birth of Jesus is. It's the pivot of human history. A little earlier I read that poem, a poem by Ursula Fanthorpe, and the words before turned into after, BC into AD. Because it's so important to John's poetic painting of Jesus' birth, it's worth reminding ourselves how the biblical story begins. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the face of the deep. The world before the word by which God speaks things into existence is one of darkness and disorder. And such also, John says, is the condition of our world, the world into which Jesus was born. Just as God's first words were, "Let there be light," so John says of Jesus, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The opening scene of creation, the opening scene of recreation is light coming into the darkness. When light comes, the darkness is defeated. The only power that darkness has is in the space that's granted it by the absence of light. Darkness can never snuff out light. In fact, you can only know light and darkness in relation to one another. If you look up the word darkness in the dictionary, you'll find that it refers to the absence of light. And so when we speak of it being dark outside, it means that there isn't much light outside. But the language of light and darkness is about so much more than just the physical light that we can see. We use light and dark as metaphors, don't we? It's a metaphor of knowledge and ignorance. You know, we say, they kept me in the dark about their plans. Or we say, oh, thank you, you've really shed light on that for me. We say, we use it as a metaphor of good and evil. We say, be careful, there's a dark side to her character. Or we say, they're a shining example of good practice. It's also a metaphor of happiness and unhappiness. We say, it was a really dark time in my life. Or we might say, finally, I can see light at the end of the tunnel. And all of these different ways of thinking about light and darkness are in play when John speaks of Jesus as God's light. John is saying that Jesus is the light by which we can see things as they really are. He's the light who shows us the truth about God, the truth about the world, the truth about life, the truth about us. John is saying Jesus is the light by which we can know the difference between good and evil. He is light and beauty and goodness and perfection and love personified. John is saying Jesus is the light who shines in the darkness, bringing us God's warmth and joy, God's love and hope. John is saying that because of Jesus, even the deepest darkness, the valley of the shadow of death, is no longer impenetrable. The light has come. And yet let's ponder that image just a little longer. Because Do we need a torch at noon in the brilliant sunshine of a summer's day? No. We need it in the darkness. It's at night that my children turn on their night lights, not during the daytime. And it's no coincidence that the church chooses to celebrate the birth of Jesus in the middle of winter when the world is at its darkest. And the world can often feel like a very dark place, can't it? Especially as we spend another Christmas with the spectre of COVID-19 looming over us, not quite sure what this Omicron variant is going to be bringing us. But it's not just COVID-19, is it? Because we need only watch the news for 10 minutes to see the dark cloak that suffering and pain and injustice casts over our world. And it's not just on the TV, it's in our own lives. It's in the lives of those we know who are suffering. It's in our own lives. It's in our own hearts. And the good news, John tells us, is that a light has come from God to penetrate the darkness. When it's completely dark, we have no idea where we are, what's around us, who's around us. And that's what makes it so scary, isn't it? To be in the dark, whether that darkness is physical, whether that darkness is metaphorical, can feel overwhelming. It can feel like it's surrounding us, enveloping us, suffocating us. The darkness has a way of preying on our fears and our hurts to the point that we don't even know if we're hiding from monsters or whether we're chasing shadows. But it's into this very darkness that Jesus comes. Jesus doesn't come into the light. The light comes into the darkness. Our darkness, the darkness of this world, the pains and the sorrows and the griefs and the anxieties and the worries of this world as it is. God doesn't descend from heaven on a golden cloud, but in Jesus he's born in the mud and the muck and the mess of the manger. The light shines in the darkness, John says. And this then is the true wonder of Christmas. Jesus doesn't come into a world of light, but to be the light of the world. God, when he comes to meet us in Jesus, God doesn't come to people whose lives are already bathed in glorious sunshine. He comes to people like us, whose lives are often lived in the shadows of darkness. What John is so masterfully telling us at the start of his gospel is that God's purpose in sending Jesus to be the light of the world isn't to bring life into sharper focus for us because our eyesight is already pretty good. No, it's to give sight to the blind. That's what light is. It's something that makes vision possible. And the Christmas story says that in Jesus, there is a light to illuminate our darkness. No matter what that darkness is, there's light. And all we need is nothing. All we need to do is to recognize that we're in the dark. That we're in the dark spiritually. When it comes to knowing who God is and what God's like, that we're in the dark morally when it comes to living truly loving and selfless lives as we should, that we're in the dark emotionally when it comes to experiencing the kind of joy and fulfillment that only God can give. All we need is our need. The only impenetrable darkness, the Bible says, is to think that we're already bathed in light. The light of Jesus can only come into our lives if we're willing to be open and honest that there is darkness. It's only to a world of darkness that the light is good news. And so the question that all of us are challenged to grapple with in this Christmas story is, what will we do with the light? And perhaps for some of us tonight is the night to say yes to God's light. Yes to Jesus shining the light of God's love and joy and truth into our lives. Not as an abstract idea, but in the way that only a person can do, a living relationship. And perhaps for some of us, we know that we've wandered away from the light and we need to come back to the light. Perhaps for some of us, we're feeling as if there's a great deal of darkness in our lives and we desperately need to know more about this light. The light shines in the darkness, John says, and the darkness has not overcome it. My prayer for all of us here this evening is that we would know that light in our lives, in whatever darkness we are facing. Amen.